Hello, hello. Welcome back to the show. I'm Nicole Holland, your host. And today I'm here with a mentor and friend of mine who I'm super excited to introduce you to. If you don't already know him, we've actually been rescheduling this appointment since March, and we're recording here in August. So this is a long time coming, and I'm super excited to introduce my friend Jason Van Orden. He
Hi.
helps.
Oh, sorry. I came in too soon.
All right.
Apologies. So excited. I just jumped the gun.
All right. So those people watching the video, fuck it. Why start over? The people watching the video are seeing all this, but let's cut for my audio editor and we'll take it from me introducing you. So hang on. Jason helps thought leaders reach a larger audience with their ideas, create new income streams from their expertise, and build business models that align with their goals. As a consultant, trainer, and strategist, he draws from 13 years of researching top internet influencers, as well as personal experience gained by launching over 60 online courses, teaching more than 7,000 entrepreneurs, generating $6 million in online course sales, and 8 million downloads of his podcast. Jason's mission is to help more visionaries with impactful ideas to reach the people they serve best and the problems they're uniquely positioned to solve. It is such a pleasure to have him here and to get to have a really unconventional and interesting personal conversation with him that you get to listen in on. So, Jason, welcome to the show.
Hi there, Nicole. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay. Those are some big numbers there. And
lots of numbers.
Lots of numbers.
Somebody told me when we were rewriting that, we need numbers. I was like, okay, fine. I'll get you some numbers. So there are the numbers.
They're the numbers. And you'd never know it because walking down the street, you're the most humble person. And yet
that's nice. Yeah.
Have really influenced the industry, the online marketing industry since its birth, essentially. I mean, you were one of the first, if not the first, marketing podcast out there.
Definitely the first podcast about internet business. There might have been a marketing podcast, a couple, maybe one or two before us. But yeah, very early on, very first internet business podcast.
Very first internet business podcast. And what was the name of it?
Internet Business Mastery.
And many, 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 many of today's biggest podcasters and influencers attribute their start in it to you and to your show host, and learned so much from you. And so it's really an honor to have you here. Rather than me kind of giving those little bits and pieces of information, why don't you give my listeners a better overview of how you're serving and supporting people today on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So today, so the Internet Business Mastery was a podcast and a business I was involved with for about 11 or so years. And then it was just time for a shift. I mean, that's, I think, a really long time for any entrepreneur to be doing one thing, right? And I went into kind of what I call almost a midlife crisis in a way, though without, I don't know, buying a Harley or the other like stereotypical things people think of as a midlife crisis. But it was more just, what do I want to do next? Who do I want to serve next? Where can I create the best value in the world next? And what I decided, which you talked about there in my bio, is that I love working with people who have ideas that they want to get out into the world in a bigger way. And I just believe that because of the internet, now everybody's got access to that possibility of connecting with a population or a problem that they are uniquely, positioned because of their story and their expertise. They're uniquely positioned to be able to solve that. And so I just noticed that there's a lot more people. I mean, we're coming out of that kind of this Wild West period, I think, of internet business where the internet was, hey, there's like gold in the hills. Let's go see if we can make some money there. And I don't, that's fine. But now we're seeing a lot more people, rather than it being about, what are the cool different, ways to make money on the internet and find the right keywords and the little niche opportunities, that now we're seeing a lot of people coming on just expressly because, sure, they want to make money, but they just see the internet as a great amplifier for their message, their method, their movement. And those are the people I love working with now. And what I noticed is a lot of those big visionary idea maker thinker types, their minds don't think as strategically, or at least in the way that my mind thinks strategically, and that they needed a lot of insight and help to kind of organize and wrap around their idea and approach to connect it with the right people, to translate their brilliance onto the internet in terms of a business model and a content marketing strategy. And so that's what I decided to do. I thought, well, if these ideas need help being seen, being found by the right people, then I would love to be the person that comes up with the best ways for those ideas, to help those people to get their ideas out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And we're going to get into your personal journey, because I'm going to have you back on the show, as we discussed earlier, to talk about how my listeners can implement strategy design if they can wait. I mean, if they can't wait, of course, we'll let them know at the end how to get in touch with you and have your help directly. But yeah, we'll have you come back and really talk about the business of how you help people through strategy design. But today I'd love to talk with you about some more sensitive issues. You and I have known each other for a little while now, and things have, you're very transparent, but there's a lot of sensitive things that have been, I don't know, milestones or markers in your life. I don't know what the right word would be. Just recently, you wrote a newsletter discussing ADHD and how you were recently diagnosed with that. And so I'd love to kind of hear from you what that means to you, how you dealt with it when you were first diagnosed, and why did you even inquire? Because I think as entrepreneurs, we go through so many ups and downs and twists and turns that it feels like it's like a bipolar roller coaster every single day, right? So, right. And you've really started focusing on your own personal mental health. And so, yeah, any of that. And I don't know, wherever you want to start.
Sure. Well, as I already mentioned, that big shift in my business was also just kind of a big shift in searching inside of myself and what I had been doing, what I still wanted to do in the world. And it also, it went into being like this very, certain time, having this business that was growing and doing well, and then suddenly being in a place where that's not what I wanted to do anymore. And it kind of just, it's a bit of a crisis, identity crisis, all of a sudden, to have been known as, the guy that does this podcast and started this podcast, and all these people were inspired by him, and to like let that piece of your identity go. And now all of a sudden you're like, well, who am I now? I imagine it must be, I don't know, anybody who like works really hard towards something for, I don't know. I don't know what it's like for like an Olympic athlete the day after the Olympics are over. And it's like, and I'm not saying I'm an Olympic athlete, but all of a sudden your brain's just like, what? And part of that process of kind of looking forward was that I, for a number of different reasons, I fell into a depression. And I've had mental health struggles for, years. But I was first diagnosed with like depression and anxiety and taking medicine probably about 2003 or something like that, right? So a while ago. ADD was not part of the picture back then. As far as being diagnosed or anything like that. But I was kind of put back into a position because of the return, despite, being on medication and stuff, the return of like a really serious depression, just going and seeing a psychiatrist again and going, okay, well, something's not working here anymore. What's going on, right? And so there's the adjusting of stuff. And that was just showing up in my life, to bring it back to kind of like business and pursuits and things like that. Over the course of 2016, the way that this showed up is, I'm searching for what I want to do next, and I'd get excited about something like, okay, I'm going to write a book, for instance, right? And I'd have an idea, and I'd be like going to the cafe regularly and just writing, and like, this is awesome, this is great. Maybe, last for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And then all of a sudden my motivation would just like tank out of nowhere, just like, bam, gone, inexplicably. And that like happened, then I get another, and I just kind of be down in this weird, just not motivated at all for a while. And that might go on for weeks. And then all of a sudden something else would just catch and excite me again. And I'd be off, and then it'd tank. And that after that happened, 4 or 5 or 6 times, like I started being afraid of my own motivation, basically. It's like you get an idea and it's like, well, why should I trust or believe that I'm going to be able to carry through on this now? It's just like something's not, why even get going if who knows when all of a sudden I'm just going to lose all motivation and interest for it. And this is about the time that I finally started going and seeing a psychiatrist, and he started tweaking the medicine. And things did start improving, coming back in terms of, apathy started going away, with one tweak, and the fog starts removing. But then finally we got to this one part where now I was finding myself motivated to pursue things again, but I could tell something else was just still off. And I just kind of explaining to him what it was like when I would sit down to work. And I was like, I have motivation. I have all these ideas. My creativity's back, which is amazing. My confidence was coming back, because after those 4 or 5, ups and downs, like your confidence starts going down too. Right. And my confidence was coming back, but I was like, but I'm just having a really hard time. And I don't know if the word I used at the time was focusing, but that was basically what I would tell him. And he's like, okay, so and I was trying everything, Pomodoro technique and this and that and the other. And finally he started asking me some more questions and said, well, he started asking me questions about my childhood, right? Because often with diagnosing ADD, there's certain things in the childhood you can go back, and none of those things were fitting the questions he was asking me. And so, but finally he's like, well, you know what? I would like you to try Adderall. And I was like, okay, great. I probably at that point I was ready. I was trying to think if I was reticent at all. At that point I was just like, whatever you think, I'm ready to try. Cause I'm ready to after this rough year, I just want to get going and feel good about my work and stuff again. And the first day, you hear people who do have ADD when they first take something like Adderall or Ritalin, or there's a number of different things out there, right? How it's like all of a sudden all the processors turn on, or just a fog removes, or there's different explanations that people give. But it was all of a sudden I was just bam, able to zone in and get stuff done. Now the truth is, even though it was working for me, part of me was still skeptical that I had ADD, and not in I was ashamed, oh no, I don't want to be that, but more in I just didn't feel like I had the right to claim, I guess, this label of ADD, especially when there's people who have struggled with it, since they were a child, and it's been such a part of their life and all these things. And, but I was like, whatever, the medicine works great. I'm off and going again. But as I talked to him more and started doing research, I started realizing there's all these different ways that ADD presents. And, he said, look, often, he's like, I think because ADD affects what are called executive functions, which have to do with things like focusing and sometimes scheduling and, just logistical things that, ADD minds just don't think quite the same way as, I guess. I mean, I don't want to say neurotypical is what they say, not normal, because it's, that's really not a normal, right? But he said, I think you've just gotten really good in your life at compensating, but you finally reached a point where your body, your mind are tired of trying to compensate all the time. And so now, that's why the medicine is helping you so much. And I was like, it was only actually now, a year and a half later, as I've really started listening to a lot of podcasts, and there's an excellent, I believe it's Jessica McCabe is her name, the excellent TEDx talk about ADD. And when I listened to that, all of a sudden I was like, okay, wait, this is me. This is starting to explain a lot more about my life. And I started listening to podcasts where there'd be Q&As, people asking questions about, and I'm like, oh my gosh, these are all the things that I have a hard time with. And so, and I think, anytime you whether it's some strange rash and you finally go to the doctor and they give you an explanation, you just feel like, oh good, at least I know what it is and I can do something about it now. All of a sudden I finally had that kind of a feeling about it. And so all these things that I had seen as challenges or weaknesses or things that I just kind of pushed aside and didn't want to see, because I'm like, no, I'm a smart, capable person. That's not an issue for me. All of a sudden I was able to start owning those as that's just a part of how my brain works and is wired. And now I can go about doing whatever I need to compensate for that and emphasize the strengths of an ADD mind and compensate for the challenges of an ADD mind. So that's kind of what brought me to this point. And it very much is tied in with the depression and stuff, because it often with ADD, there ends up being some mental health challenges for a whole myriad reasons, but all of a sudden a lot of things started making sense for me.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing so vulnerably and so openly about what you've been going through. You mentioned that the meds are working, and also I wonder, is there anything else, like sort of in terms of your lifestyle and managing your environment, managing your schedule, anything that has helped you in addition to the medication to get control over the condition? I don't know. Is it called a condition?
I don't know what the words that are used. Everyone's so like careful about what words to use. But just, yeah, the way that my brain works, I guess yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing is that, I took the medication, it's worked great. And that's kind of been just the one main thing for the last year and a half. But now, just in the last couple months that I've been listening more to podcasts and kind of owning more for myself. Again, I mean, I don't think it was like, oh, I'm ashamed to say I have ADD. It was just, again, I didn't feel like I had the right to. I don't want to be, but now that I'm like, okay, nope, now I have been like noticing in these podcasts and taking all these ideas. And so like, to answer your question, and I wish I'd done this sooner. Like for instance, my mind, like I'm always doing weird things, like I'll double book stuff all the time. And I just like, I have this weird way that I silo stuff in like these different aspects of my brain. Also, I'll find myself with a personal thing and a business thing like booked at the same time. And I mean, that's just one silly little example, but that's just an executive function thing. That's sometimes just the way things kind of get separated and organized in my mind. And then all of a sudden it's like a day or two before and I realize it. And now I've got this, kind of stressful thing I've got to so for instance, one thing that I've just started implementing, and this gets emphasized over and over again by ADD coaches and counselors and experts and whatever, is you have to have systems to compensate for these things. And one is basically getting this stuff out of your brain in some kind of just really consistent, dedicated, just religious practice, and then have routines and systems around that then compensate for all these little gotchas that happen to you. So at the end of my day, I've just started implementing where it's like, I'm going to have a shutdown routine, which is probably a good idea anyway, to kind of have a delineation between like work time and family time, especially when you work at home, right? But if all I need is just a little checklist in that 15 minutes, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to, I'm going to record 3 wins for the day because, and I don't know if this is related to ADD or not, but I just have a hard time giving myself credit for the things I did do. And I usually think about the things I didn't do. It probably is ADD. It is ADD related, because no matter how hard I try, I cannot get myself to estimate correctly how long tasks are going to take, which might seem weird to some people. It's like, well, how can you not? It's like, I don't know, like my brain. And so I'm consistently ending a day feeling like I didn't get done everything that I thought I'd get done.
And I think that's also just, not to dismiss the ADD part, but I think that's
it's a common,
entrepreneurs in general.
Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure I don't have ADD, but I'm right there with you, Jason.
Well, totally. And like, but the weird thing there is like, and you're absolutely right. I've tried, like, ostensibly Pomodoro helps you start tracking. It's like, well, typically this is how long this task takes me, but it's really so variable for me that even systems, I've had a hard time with that. But what I'm doing then to mitigate against always feeling like I didn't get enough done, part of that routine is record 3 things that I feel good, that were wins, that I feel good about doing that day, right? And the next thing, coming back to the scheduling, is every single day, so at least 5 days a week when I work, I'm going to end the day by looking ahead at least 7 days and just kind of looking and saying, okay, are there any conflicts here? Did I forget to book a babysitter at a time I need a babysitter? Do I need to be preparing? Because things are always ending up last minute too. It's like, oh my gosh, I actually need to like write up or make a slide deck or whatever for that, rather than if I just review multiple days. And then once a week, I'll review a month ahead. And this is just going to become part of a 15-minute routine at the end of my workday. Recently, I finally got serious again about using Asana and just like dumping everything and just training myself. It's like, look, the moment something, and I've got a pretty darn good memory for certain kinds of stuff. And so again, it's why and this is the funny thing is he's like, often when you have certain gifted talents and you're an ADD, you use those gifted talents to kind of compensate or mask over some of the pitfalls. And so I would think I was always relying on my memory, and sometimes it would, I'd be able to remember stuff. But again, just certain things like dates and times and, even I've got a great memory for learning something, I'll like retain tons of information. When it comes to like remembering, oh, I need to do this before I just have to train myself now. I'm just dumping everything into Asana. And now I have a morning ritual and an end of day ritual about how I process and just capture those tasks. And I'm just kind of giving myself permission to be like, okay, these are the shortcomings of how my brain works. And it doesn't mean that I'm not as smart and accomplished and whatever as I thought I was. And I do have those smarts and memory that serve me really well in these other areas of life. But I just need to own the fact that in this area of my life, it fails me consistently enough that it causes stress. And why put myself and others through that, right? So I'm getting more serious about the digital systems. Apparently, and I can see looking back, the one gotcha for people with ADD is that we get bored of things like novelty. In fact, science has found DNA that they think, a gene that they think is tied to ADD, and they call it the novelty seeking gene. And I thought that was really interesting. But because we're novelty seeking, the one gotcha is you get bored with a tool or a process. And while most experts would say, don't change tools, don't change processes, don't change systems, when it comes to people with ADD, they actually say, yeah, you might have to change what tool you're like. If you're bored of Asana, don't just stop doing the process. Go find another tool that will be fun. Start using Trello to do the same thing or something, right? Which I thought was really interesting. Because normally I'd just be like, I think that's one reason I would just stop using Asana is I actually got bored of it and I didn't realize that's what was happening. It might seem silly, but again, this is just realizing this is how my brain works. This is what it needs. Therefore, I'm going to own that and operate in congruence with it rather than trying to fight or deny or just kind of smooth over in some wonky way these little gotchas that keep biting me,
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's going to be super, super useful and helpful to a lot of the listeners who can relate and maybe are struggling with ADHD or ADD themselves, or who have family members who are. So thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, you're very well known. You're an influencer, and we've already covered all that. But in terms of coming out, even though you don't have anything to be ashamed of, and we talked about that a bit, but in terms of sharing, like, hey, this is something that I am working through. Mm-hmm. Did you have any fear around making this public? Did you have any concern around how people would receive the information or what they would think of you?
Absolutely. Like I said, since 2003, I've known about these mental health issues and taken one medication or another. And yet outside of like close family members and like my wife, like nobody knew that, right? Not even my business partner knew. I suppose if he watches this, he'll know. But about towards the end of that really tough year in 2016, I attended am I getting my years right? Anyway, at some point in this whole shifting identity, figuring out process, part of me turning that around, I already mentioned going to see a psychiatrist, but one of the things that I think was really weighing on me and making things worse, honestly, is that I could tell I was really starting to isolate myself and not like reach out for support or help and of course, like I didn't want to tell people why I was struggling. Like who wants to go and say, yeah, I keep losing my motivation. My confidence is going like this, I'm this accomplished person that's done all these things. And now, and part of my brain was like, oh yeah, I guess you used all your good ideas, Jason. Now you're not relevant anymore. Like there's that voice over here talking. But finally I went to a mastermind that a friend invited me to. A mastermind weekend for a few days, and we just split the cost of a house to get together for a weekend and talk about our businesses. And I didn't go planning on talking about my mental health struggles and everything I've been dealing with. I had the whole list of tactical, strategic questions I thought I was going to ask. But within a couple, hot seats, because that was the format, hot seat format. After the first couple hot seats and just seeing how vulnerable other people were getting, thankfully, because I think that's really where you get the best mastermind. I knew exactly what I needed to bring up. And so, this is something I'd kept inside. And Brene Brown talks about how shame just feeds off of that secrecy, and that just like, not wanting to share something. And there was like some fear that people would see that as, oh, well, clients would be like, oh, well, I can't trust his mind. I can't trust whatever. And there's all kinds of reasons why we play these mind tricks and are just convinced that the moment we share the thing, people won't want to associate with us, do business with us, be friends with us, be colleagues or whatever, essentially being ostracized. And in our like evolutionary animal instinct brain, ostracization is death, because without the tribe, who are you? You're a person in the wilderness alone, you're going to die, right? So that's like what my animal brain was telling me. And it was hard to bring it up and share it with this room of colleagues. But when I did that, I had this huge, just emotional release. I just like this, I could just feel it coming off, and just, and after that, I went up to my room. We each had our own room. And I just like, I think I cried for just like 10 or 15 minutes straight. Probably the only time other than the birth of my daughter that I'd cried, I don't know, in my entire like adult life, which I wish wasn't the case, because usually crying is a good way to process emotions, right? But I could just tell that, and the fact that my colleagues were hearing me and not rejecting me and sharing their own similar stories and, offering up their insights and support and just sympathy was huge. And after that, that kind of planted in my mind how good that felt to share it. But then also, I just started eventually thinking about, like who else like me is just kind of in that silence thinking, man, I'm deficient because of these things I struggle with. And it took a few months for me to finally kind of get up the courage. But finally I reached out to a friend to do an interview, or they reached out to me, and I said, yeah, and I know what I want to talk about on your show. I'd really like to talk about these mental health challenges. And so finally, then I just opened up about the whole thing on one podcast, and that was, about a year or so ago. And since I've done, a good handful of them about the same topic. This is actually the first time I've talked about the ADD. And again, that was just because I was like, well, I take the medicine and it works, but I don't think I'm actually ADD, which I don't know. But so now I'm actually talking about that, because the numbers are clear, and it makes a lot of sense why a lot of people with ADD become entrepreneurs. So I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that this might resonate with. So for years and years and years, didn't talk about it, but now the last year and a half or so, totally open about talking about it. And the first 2 or 3 times, there's like what I think Brene Brown uses this phrase called the vulnerability hangover. Like you share all this stuff and it might feel good in the moment, and then the next day you're like, oh, what have I done? Now all that information is out there and I don't know what that means, but after the 2 or 3 times of that happening, it's like, nope, nothing bad has happened. In fact, the opposite, people just going, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think another just little small thing I had is like, I didn't want to sound like I was being self-indulgent or just like, oh, look at me and all this stuff that I've been through. Because like sometimes that happens too, right? But after you do it a few times, you just kind of face that fear. Now I'm pretty open about a lot of stuff. And it's because not wanting my own shame and isolation to grow, and not wanting to hold back the opportunity to hopefully greatly impact other people by telling my story.
I love that. And I really appreciate your vulnerability, appreciate you sharing that. You mentioned that lots of entrepreneurs are ADD. And you also mentioned strengths of the ADD mind earlier. Mm-hmm. Can you share some of the strengths of the ADD mind, and also how you're seeing, I don't know, is it stat or is it just an awareness? But when you say that lots of entrepreneurs have ADD, how would you know?
So one of the strengths of the ADD mind, and these things aren't exclusive to ADD, but when you have ADD, you likely have these things, and to probably a higher than average degree. And one of the things about ADD mind is that novelty seeking gene, right? It makes you insatiably curious. And so, whereas in the past, you might have been, shamed for jumping around and not sticking to one thing, right? Actually, that's how innovation happens. And in fact, in MBA schools and in business and corporations, like all the talk about, especially in the super fast-paced internet world, you'll go to any MBA school and they're talking about innovation is everything in your strategy. If you want your company to thrive and survive. And I mean, just look, like Google overtook Yahoo like that in an instant. And so that scanning, that curiosity, if you know how to feed it and use it in the right way, like it makes you a good innovator, and it makes you really good at seeing, bringing something from a seemingly unrelated place and then applying it to a new, some kind of new application and coming up with a different solution that other people wouldn't have seen. Now, it doesn't take ADD to do that, but the ADD mind does tend to be, to operate that way. So that's one for sure. One counterintuitive thing is that people think that with ADD, you're just like, you can't sit down, you can't focus. And yes, that is to a degree, but then also there's an ability under the right circumstances and the right thing to go into a hyper-focus mode, like really hyper-focus mode, almost like a flow, and get things done in a crazy efficient way. Now, it can be a gotcha, because I've been in a hyper-focus mode where then I just kept letting it go. And at some point it's like you got pedal to the metal and you're just like grinding, and it can use up energy very, very quickly. But that hyper-focus can be super useful at times when you know how to apply it in the right ways. So those are two of the things that come to my mind right off. I'm not remembering any more right now, but I know there's more than that. And, the podcasts and the TED Talks and stuff do such a great job of, like I said, it's only been the last few months. I'm really actually starting to absorb this stuff by myself. But yeah, those are two that definitely come to mind that are strengths of the ADD mind.
Well, thank you. And speaking of podcasts, you are, I believe, we haven't talked in quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing how fast this year has flown by. Are you still launching a new podcast soon? And
Yes.
is it still dealing with mental health stories?
Right. So I have two ideas for podcasts, and that is a podcast I want to do. And it came to me and I got so excited. And I tend not to be a quick start. I tend to get an idea and do a lot of research, which has its strength and its time, but then it can also keep things from happening. So in the effort to try to be a quick start, I just put out there, I want to do this podcast. And it was going to be interviews of entrepreneurs with mental health struggles, much like this one that we're doing here. I absolutely want to do that. I've just had a whole lot of stuff on my plate, and that is more of a labor of love thing. And I'm also in a position of growing essentially a new business right now too. So I'm trying to gauge the right timing of what I need to do is get a group of volunteers to help do that labor of love project, somebody to find and book the interviews, somebody to do this and da. So I guess if anybody's interested in that, let me know.
Say, calling all volunteers who will have a vested interest in.
Yeah. I mean, the response, when I put it out there, the response was insane. People they're like, yes. And people keep asking me, is that coming out, and wanting to be interviewed, and I'll share. I know
people who I'm happy to book for you.
Awesome. Well, so it needs to happen. It definitely needs to happen. And the other thing that needs to happen, and this is more for my business, is, after being a podcaster for all those years, I paused for the last couple of years. I haven't had a podcast of my own. I've been on a lot of podcasts, but I need that. I think I need that outlet again. So I'm starting a new podcast. I think I'm just going to call it, it's funny, we were just talking before how you're going to do the Nicole Holland show. That's what you're calling it, right?
Yes. And so you're one of the first episodes going out on the Nicole Holland show instead of the Business Building Rockstar show. Yeah. And
I decided to do mine just as the JVO show. I wrote that down in my journal a few months back because I was just, kind of in this vein of the ADD scanning. There's definitely going to be a very clear audience and kind of flavor of the show, but there's a lot of things also I want to pull together. Strategy, business strategy, thought leadership, creativity. So just kind of a Venn diagram cross section of a lot of these different things. But anybody interested in like thought leadership and online business would be interested in the show, but also giving myself that latitude to kind of like go down some different, so that I need to get out very, very soon.
And that's really why I decided, I mean, probably sat with putting my name behind my show, like definitely for at least a year, probably close to a year and a half. And I was like, it's just a weird name, the Nicole Holland Show. Like, it's not like the Tim Ferriss Show or Jordan Harbinger. And then I'm like, wait a minute, they've got weird names too. It's not like they roll off your tongue. They only roll off your tongue because you're used to saying them all the time. So,
right.
Like, all right.
Right. Like, the Tim Ferriss Show, that just sounds so, no, it's because you've heard it 50 times. That's why it sounds so.
So totally. I love it. I love JVO, the JVO show.
Yeah, I just so happen to have a good rhyming in there, JVO show.
Yeah. And it's funny because, I mean, when we first met, I never knew you were called JVO. And then I realized, JVO on everything. And people call you JVO. And it's like, okay. Now I get it. Jason Van Orden, JVO.
Kind of became a thing.
Dig it.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, we've covered a lot of the bases here. And before we wrap up, I just wonder, is there any kind of final thought you want to leave the audience with? Things you want people to take away?
Yeah, I mean, here are a few big takeaways. One big takeaway from my story, I hope, I mean, whether it's ADD or mental health challenge, whatever challenge, I mean, like you said, entrepreneurs, we can feel very bipolar just because we're putting ourselves in a position of a lot of uncertainty, right? And whether it's, you made a bad bet and now, cash is tight, or whether you trusted the wrong person and you're feeling like there's always something we might be dealing with, right? And it threatens to slow you up and erode at your confidence and things like that. And like those are the moments where you most need to be able to reach out and have people to be able to talk to and get support around these things. And I talked about how I kept isolating myself more and more and more. And finally I started getting out there, and I ended up having 50 plus conversations because I just kind of made a goal every week to have at least 2 calls just with new friends or old friends. And one of the biggest benefits of having those conversations, I mean, besides just the networking of it and keeping up relationships, was like every single call just reminded me of like the humanity we share. Everyone was dealing with something, right? And we just ended up, and they're like, yeah, and I'm feeling down because of such and such, or I'm struggling with this or that. Like everybody's, even the people that got their big number. I mean, we had all those big numbers, and I didn't want to, at first I didn't have those in my bio because, I know why we need to have the numbers sometimes too, but it's because that's all people see. And then they don't see the depression or the ADD or the year of my confidence tanking. And so don't isolate yourself, and find 1 or 2 colleagues that you can trust to be vulnerable with when you need. I mean, we've had, you and I, Nicole, a couple, vulnerable conversations that have been very helpful, I think, for me. And then I hope for you as well. And that's just, it's so important to have those outlets because it's crushing if you don't. So that would be one huge takeaway, I would say. And then I guess the other one is, if you're listening to this and you think you do have some kind of mental health challenge, and I don't want to say that ADD is a mental health challenge, but it definitely relates and is tied to a lot of health challenges, is often accompanied by. So ADD is not a mental health challenge, but if you think you've got ADD or depression or anxiety or bipolar or anything like that, and you haven't gone to see a good doctor, and not just like a family general practitioner doctor that, they might go, okay, I think, you meet the 5 criteria. I think you might have anxiety, because that's what I did at first. And it wasn't nearly, go see a good like psychiatrist. And there's nothing wrong with, if you need medication right now to help you turn things around or even them out or get up to so just go, I've resisted that at times too, and gone for months, sometimes suffering when it's just, I didn't need to do so. So I think those are 2. Then the third big takeaway, I think, is that whole idea of just finally owning and recognizing, these are pitfalls, weaknesses, whatever challenges that I run into on a regular basis, and they're just part of who I am and how my mind works. And it doesn't mean I'm a failure or a lousy person or an incompetent. I just need to recognize them, and that's okay. And then I can now I can compensate for them. Now I can mitigate with simple systems. And if I don't look at them, then I'm not going to compensate, and it's just going to continue to create stress for me and my other people. So I think that'd be the third big takeaway from today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Where can my listeners go to connect with you and continue the conversation?
Yeah, so I think two key places, jasonvanorden.com. And if you sign up for my newsletter there, I send out a newsletter every Friday. And then sometimes I'll get something I'm excited about that I think people need to know about, and I'll write a series about that. So that's a good place to get my latest, greatest ideas. And then you can find me on Facebook, my Facebook page, and just Jason Van Orden. And that's another great place to keep up with me too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicole.